Welcome to Successful Gardener. I'm Lauren Hill, North Carolina Cooperative Extension Horticulture Agent in Cabarrus County. Today I'm with one of my dear friends, Mary Duke. We used to work together at one of the botanical gardens in the Charlotte area. And today we are at the UNCC Botanical Gardens. Mary, I'd love for you to share with our audience today a little bit more about yourself and your role at the Botanical Gardens.
Sure. So I am the Orchid Curator here at UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens. I've been here for 3 years and I've really enjoyed growing orchids here. And orchids are amazing.
They are. They're spectacular.
They are. They're one of the they are actually the largest group of plants in the world.
Wow.
There's 900 genus. 30,000 species and between 40 to 100,000 hybrids. So with that being said, for our viewers, you don't need to know everything about every single orchid. It's impossible. So when you're choosing an orchid to grow, just learn about that one specific orchid and you'll be fine. You'll be successful with your orchids.
Excellent. So Mary has taught me quite a bit in our times working together about orchids, and today she's going to share a lot of valuable and pertinent information with you. How to water an orchid, how to pot an orchid. We're going to talk about some popular orchids and give us a little show and tell around the greenhouse today.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Lauren, did you want to start with potting an orchid, and then we can talk about how to take care of it?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So, first of all,
ooh, that's a big pot. You must be doing a big orchid today.
Well, actually, with this pot here, this is actually going to be our disposal pots.
Oh.
Yes. So, why don't you grab an orchid?
Perfect.
You can have that one. I will have this one. So, first of all, we'll see what the grower has been growing them in. This is sphagnum moss, and this is a bark mix.
Okay.
And so, we're going to remove our orchid from the pot first.
And is this a Phalaenopsis orchid?
This is a Phalaenopsis or a moth orchid, and I really find that this is the best orchid to grow for somebody that is new to growing orchids.
Great, and you can find these at a lot of different stores, can't you?
Oh, absolutely. Trader Joe's, IKEA, any of the local department stores.
Grocery stores.
So what we're looking for here is the health of the roots. And what's really cool about orchids is, so this outer layer here is called velamen, and this is actually made up of a whole bunch of dead cells. And the purpose of the velamen is actually, it's a sponge and it absorbs water.
Wow.
And then this little thing right here is called the cortex. And so this spongy velamen will hold the water, and then when the cortex is ready, it will absorb the water.
How
neat.
So
it's very, very cool. So another really cool thing about orchids is they are one of the oldest flowering plants in the world. They've been around for over 200 million years.
That's incredible.
Yes, they were around before the continents separated.
Whoa.
Yes, which is incredible. So they are on, obviously, every single continent in the world because they were all grouped together at one time. And they can grow except for Antarctica because it's
too cold up there.
It's too cold,
right?
But with those 70-degree days, who knows?
Yes.
Maybe one day they'll be growing on Antarctica too.
All right, well, I think I have my orchid ready for the potting to begin.
I think you do too. So first what we're going to do is, Lauren, we need to sterilize our shears.
Yes, we do. So with plants, it's really important to prevent disease to start with clean planting and potting materials, right, Mary?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so orchids can have viruses. Did you want to try?
I'll leave it to the expert.
Okay. So orchids can have viruses, and sometimes you know if it has a virus, but sometimes it's asymptomatic. So it's always best to sterilize and wash your hands between repotting orchids. I prefer to use a propane torch.
Yeah.
Specifically because viruses are killed at 250 degrees.
Perfect.
So if you were to use a cigarette lighter or a candle, it's not hot enough. You can also use bleach or alcohol, but they have to sit in the bleach or alcohol for at least 20 minutes. So this is a very quick method.
And it keeps your tools from rusting.
Yes, exactly.
Perfect.
So let's start removing all of the bad roots.
I have a lot on this one,
so
unfortunately.
What we're looking at right here is, see this root is brown.
It's dehydrated.
It's easily coming off the plants. It's all
dead.
Wrinkly. It's dead. So we're going to cut that off because we don't want any rotting to occur in our
So this is
plant.
like pruning any other plant. You remove any dead or diseased material first,
yes,
right?
Exactly. Okay, so let me look at your plant.
What do you think?
Oh, that looks very, very, very awesome. That looks great. Okay,
Great.
Lauren. So now we have to choose what pot we're going to put in, what we're going to plant it in. So we've got three different pots to choose from.
Lots of sizes.
Yes. So how are you going to choose which pot to put this in?
Well, I want to make sure they have holes in the bottom, which
Yes.
all of these do.
And orchids like to be root bound. Like I said, they want to have lots of air movement, but they want to dry out quickly.
Yeah.
So if I were to put this orchid in this pot, imagine how long it would take for this to dry out. Weeks,
A long time.
I would think.
Yeah, and
So
that's a waste of potting materials.
it is. And then we'll look at this one. Well, actually, it might be going in this one.
That one might be
possibly.
good.
It's a contender. This one, nope, this isn't going to work. See, it's
Too
still
big.
too big. All right, so we've got
The baby bear
the
pot.
baby pots. Exactly.
So, yep, that works great for mine as well.
So first, what we're going to do is put packing peanuts in the bottom of our pot. And you're asking, why are you using packing peanuts? Well,
You're recycling them at
we're
least.
recycling, but when you do choose your packing peanuts, make sure they're not biodegradable, because
Yeah.
biodegradable ones will start to
They'll melt
they'll
with
melt.
water, right?
Exactly. So let's put a few in there, maybe 3.
Great.
And then we're going to start stuffing gently stuffing our little roots in there.
Perfect.
Yep.
Mine is going to be nice and root bound.
It's going to be very nice and root bound. Okay, so you want to hold your orchid with one hand and make sure that the leaves are even with the top of your pot. So you don't want to bury any of your leaves. Very,
Think
very
that looks good.
Yes. And I had in my previous job, we had a hard time with orchids either staying too wet or staying too dry.
Yes.
So I had a coworker and I developed a really cool different method on how
Perfect.
to repot Phalaenopsis.
So the Mary Duke method.
Yes, the Mary Duke method. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to do some layering. So
Great.
with sphagnum moss, I have found that it stays wet a little bit too long. But at the same time, I found that bark dries out too quickly. So if we do a layer of sphagnum moss, a layer of bark, layer of sphagnum moss, a layer of bark, while the bark dries out, it will provide, the sphagnum moss will give it a little bit of hydration
Good.
between watering. So we'll start with this. All right, Lauren, so grab some sphagnum moss.
I don't know how we're going to fit all of this in the pot, but we're going to
do
try.
it. We'll do it. And this is from New Zealand. It's a long strand sphagnum moss. It's sustainable. And the really cool thing about sphagnum moss is it's actually an extension of the root system
Oh, good.
of orchids. Yes.
So when you're looking for orchid repotting supplies, can you find some of these at the local nurseries and online?
You can, absolutely. I prefer to use Orchiata for my orchid mix. So I use 3 parts Orchiata, 1 part charcoal,
Wow.
and 1 part sponge rock.
There we go.
Yes. So the sponge rock is great. It helps aerate your bark mix. And then the charcoal is really great because it's antibacterial.
Perfect.
It absorbs acids that the bark will release, and it also absorbs minerals and salts. So it's a really great
Potting
substrate.
medium. Wow.
Yes, exactly. So let's add a little bit in there.
There we go.
Yeah. And you can pack it in.
I think this is what my orchids have at home.
Really?
Could have brought them so we could repot those today,
yes,
Mary.
Absolutely. And I'm always happy to have people bring their orchids to the botanical garden, and I can help assess what they need and help them to be successful with their growing. I love getting emails. I love people visiting. So don't be hesitant to do that.
That is one of the best things about the botanical gardens is it's an educational resource to the citizens of the area. So anybody visiting, you could come in and take an educational tour and talk with the staff with questions that you might have about specific plants like the orchids we have here today.
Absolutely. And what I love about this environment is everyone can see what I'm doing. Behind us, got tons of orchids and how they're growing in our production house
Yes.
here. Nothing's behind the scenes. how I grow orchids, they can see it very, very easily.
Great.
So let's, looks like we're gonna add a little bit. Yours is
might be
pretty full there. I'll add one more layer of sphagnum moss.
Mine had quite a few roots.
Yours did. And so yours probably won't need to be repotted for another year or two.
Okay.
And here's the test. Did we pot the orchid correctly? Can you lift up the orchid?
I did it!
We did
Excellent.
it! Yes.
Great.
So, watering.
Yes. How do we water an orchid? This is a big problem. I know a lot of people, when they contact the extension office, say, well, I watered my orchid with an ice cube like the instructions said.
Yeah.
That is not correct, is it, Mary?
It's definitely not correct. So think about it this, Lauren. Orchids grow in the tropics.
Yes.
So here you are putting an ice cube on an orchid. Well, no, you're not.
I'm teasing.
And they're damaging the roots of the orchid.
Yeah.
So, and that's not enough water for your orchid. No. So my suggestion is when the orchid, so you can put your finger in there, and when the orchid medium is almost dry, then that's when it's time to water. So you bring your orchid over to the sink and you water it, and then let it drain, water it, let it drain, water it, let it drain, and then wetting everything in there. Make sure you don't actually get the leaves wet your plants, and definitely don't get the crevice.
Crown. Yeah.
Yes, because with Phalaenopsis, they're called monopodial growers. So what happens is they only grow in one direction, which is up. So if you damage that meristem in there, you damage that growing point, the plant will actually die.
Oh no.
So with that being said, never ever damage.
So water around the leaves,
plant,
or dry off the leaves if they get wet during the watering process.
Yes. And another trick is knowing how your orchid feels, how the weight of it feels. So use muscle memory.
Oh yeah.
After you water it, know how that feels, how heavy it is, and then maybe 4 or 5 days later, recheck your plant. Is it still heavy? Yeah. So that's another trick you can use. A lot of times people ask me, how do you get your orchid to rebloom?
Oh yes.
As well, that's a quite.
How often should they rebloom, and what time of year will they bloom?
Well, during January, February, and March is the orchid season, where the most orchids are growing. Specifically, Phalaenopsis. That's what they grow this time, or that time of year.
Yeah.
But orchids will grow at different times of the year, which is fortunate because I always want something blooming in the greenhouse.
You want to be able to come visit and for people to see the orchid collection at all times of the year.
Yes, exactly. So orchids will mostly just bloom once a year.
Yeah.
So you'll have an orchid blooming for 1 to 3 months, but then the rest of the month or rest of the time of the year, they'll just be dormant. They'll be growing, but they won't have.
They'll just have these beautiful green leaves to enjoy. Yeah.
Precisely. So how do you get your orchid to rebloom? Well, orchids need a 20-degree variance in temperature to actually produce a spike.
Oh.
So in your home, it's always the same temperature, around 72 degrees. And they're not getting that daytime, nighttime variance. So what I suggest is you bring your orchids outside in the summer.
That's what I did last summer, and mine bloomed this year, so all is going well.
Yes, but there are some rules to that. There's always rules. And orchids cannot tolerate temperatures below 50 degrees. So once nighttime temperatures are above 50 degrees, bring that orchid outside, but put it on a covered porch where you control the sunlight and you control the watering, because you don't want this getting rainwater on it constantly, and then you'll have some issues with rot as well.
Great.
Yes, and fertilizing. Fertilizing is very important. That also helps your orchids to rebloom. We suggest for the homeowner to water weekly. So what that means is you get fertilizer, orchid fertilizer from any store, and instead of using the full dose, use a quarter dose.
So that's very good to know.
So instead of using a teaspoon per gallon, use a quarter teaspoon. So that's a nice weak amount of fertilizer. You're not going to burn the leaves, or you're not going to burn the roots. And so if a month has 4 weeks in it, you fertilize the first 3 weeks, and then the 4th week you just water it with water.
And
that gets all the salts out of out of the plant medium because fertilizers have salts.
Yeah, they do.
And orchids don't like salts.
So we have to be careful with that. That's a good rule of thumb because I have not been following that with mine. I've been following the manufacturer's instructions. So I'll be taking that tip home. For
Fantastic.
Sure. Well, Mary, are we going to water these today? Or are we going to leave these for you to take care of?
Well, I'll definitely water that today, and I'll let you take that home.
Oh, excellent.
Yes, of course.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Well, what would you like to show us next?
Well, I'd like to show you our vanilla. Our vanilla, yes. So we have a really very productive vanilla vine here at UNC.
Oh, wow.
And so this is probably about a year old.
Good.
Yes. So vanilla. Oh, and look at this. These are all of its
the
seeds.
vanilla bean seeds.
Yes. Vanilla is the only edible orchid.
Wow.
So fruit-wise.
So vanilla bean, which we have in desserts and confections, if it's truly real vanilla, is from an orchid?
Yes, it
How
is.
amazing.
It is. And look at all these little seeds here.
Ooh.
Yes, they're really great. So orchids can produce up to 3 million seeds.
Wow,
in
I
one
believe
pod.
that. This is a pretty big
Yes.
pod.
And are you wondering why aren't there orchids everywhere if each orchid can produce 3 million seeds? Well, orchids don't have endosperms in their endosperms are tissue that surrounds their embryo, and orchids don't actually have that. They don't have like a placenta.
Yeah.
So they need fungus to help them grow.
How interesting.
It is. So if this little seed lands on a particular fungus, then it might have a chance actually to grow.
Oh.
Yes. So that's why you don't see orchids
And so that's why
everywhere.
it produces so many seeds. So that's its way of trying to reproduce.
Exactly.
Wow.
And the really neat thing about vanilla is they only bloom for 8 hours.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
it. So they need help from us for
Yeah.
them to actually be pollinated.
So you actually do the pollinating of the orchids here.
Yes, every morning when they're blooming, I go with my stepladder and a toothpick, and I actually pollinate the orchids and the vanilla orchids.
So it has to be done by hand.
Yes, and we have dozens of vanilla pods actually
how wonderful.
that have produced that are actually growing right now. They're going to stay on the vine for about 9 months, and then once they fall off and land on the ground, I'll pick them up and we will cure them for about 6 months. So these are still curing.
This one looks close, but this one's still nice and soft, and it still has some fluid, some water in it.
Yes.
It hasn't dried out completely.
Exactly.
Wow. What an interesting tidbit. Can we go take a look at the vanilla orchid?
Oh, absolutely. So Lauren,
Yes,
this
Mary.
is our vanilla vine.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't this wonderful?
This is a very big orchid.
It is. It takes about 7 years for it to finally bloom. So if you have a vanilla plant at home, you know, itty bitty one, and it grows its vines and gets bigger and bigger, it will take about 7 years for it to bloom. And it also requires a lot of sunlight.
Oh, I bet.
A lot of sunlight.
And that's why we're in the greenhouse, aren't we? Because it can get sunlight all year round.
Absolutely. Another thing I wanted to tell you is orchids can live for 100 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. It's quite incredible, but the ones that you buy in the store, they're between 5 to 7 years old, which is incredible.
That is super incredible. Well, Mary, thank you so much for sharing so much about your love of orchids and the beautiful collection at UNCC. Thanks for tuning in to Successful Gardener. If you would like to reach me, you can reach me by email or phone. I'm Lauren Hill with North Carolina Cooperative Extension with Successful Gardener, and we'll see you next time.